imagine you've just built like a cybersecurity system so advanced that it basically runs itself.
Yeah, the dream, right.
Right. I mean, it detects threats in milliseconds. It heals its own network if a server goes down. And it basically acts like this impenetrable digital fortress. It is your absolute masterpiece.
Uh-huh.
But, so you proudly hand these blueprints over to a Fortune 500 CEO, to get the funding you deserve, and they take one look, slide the paper back across the desk, and just totally reject it as a massive liability.
Which happens way more often than people think.
Exactly. And why does it happen? Because in this scenario, you decided to name your automated defense protocol something like autonomic sabotage, and your startup sequence is called, I don't know, the refiner's fire?
Yeah, it's the ultimate paradox of the brilliant engineer, honestly. You have this incredibly high-level technical capability, but it's completely wrapped up in a language that, well, actively terrifies the exact people who need to buy into it.
Right, and that counterintuitive scenario is pretty much the exact landscape we are stepping into today for this deep dive.
Yeah, and the sources we're looking at today are, they're intense.
Oh, very intense. We are talking about a massive stack of highly structured system logs, architectural blueprints, capability matrices, but, if you read between the lines, they read almost exactly like the diary of a master systems architect who is like systematically upgrading their own brain.
It's a phenomenal operational pivot to witness. We're basically tracking the evolution of a really complex cybersecurity architecture. We get to watch a transition from this legacy, internal, almost hacker-minded system, which the original author actually called the T1.1 Sovereign Gauntlet.
Such a dramatic name.
Right. Very dramatic.
Yeah.
But it transitions from that into a massive enterprise-grade, compliance-driven framework known as the T1.2 Unified Tradecraft Maturity Model.
Which just sounds so much more professional. So the mission for our deep dive today is to answer one fundamental question. How do you translate raw, chaotic, highly technical skills into undeniable executive-level business value?
That's the core of it, yeah.
And to you, the listener, whether you are a cybersecurity professional who's coding back-end infrastructure, or maybe you're a digital marketer or a manager just trying to get a project funded, this is basically the ultimate masterclass.
Absolutely.
It's about taking your highly specialized knowledge and communicating it so that the decision makers actually listen, understand, and, care.
Because to truly understand where this new architecture is actually going, we first have to understand what it's so desperately trying to escape. And that is the trap of being a misunderstood genius. It's this closed loop of knowledge where you're the only one who gets how brilliant you are.
Okay, let's unpack this.
Yeah.
Because looking through these logs, the architect realizes they have a massive roadblock. They initiate this huge refactoring sprint, as they call it, to cross the chasm from their old hobbyist system, the T1.1, to the professional standard, T1.2.
Right.
And they identify the primary enemy in this transition as this concept they call infrastructure debt.
Yes. And what's fascinating here is that they don't just treat this as some vague feeling. They actually quantify this debt mathematically.
Really? Like with an actual formula?
Yeah, an actual formula. In the sources, the formula they use is I sub D equals U sub A divided by A sub T. So basically, infrastructure debt equals unaligned assets divided by total assets.
Okay, wait. Unaligned assets. I mean, if I'm a business leader, an asset is, a server or maybe a software license. What makes an asset unaligned in this specific context?
Well, in this framework, an unaligned asset isn't just like a broken piece of hardware. It's the old jargon-heavy methodologies that are leaking into your production environment.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So if you are using terms like autonomic sabotage in your official documentation, that right there is an unaligned asset.
Because of the optics.
Exactly. While the code underneath it might be completely technically flawless, the language surrounding it causes this massive cognitive friction. If you hand a portfolio with those specific words to a Fortune 500 Chief Information Security Officer or CISO, they're going to panic.
Yeah, because it looks like a hobbyist's basement project, right? Like, it sounds like a movie hacker playing games, not a professional who is securing a multi-million-dollar enterprise.
Precisely. In the corporate space, unstructured sabotage is not a feature. It is a terrifying risk. I mean, the entire job of a CISO is to minimize risk. So if your sovereign index, which is essentially your professional reputation and your value.
Yeah.
If that's tied to language that implies recklessness, your value drops to zero, literally no matter how good your code actually is.
I think of it like taking your car to a brilliant mechanic. Like, They fix the transmission perfectly. The car drives like an absolute dream.
Right.
But when you go to pick it up, they've left black grease all over the steering wheel. And when you ask what was wrong, they explain the entire repair to you in ancient Greek.
That is a perfect way to look at it.
Right. The underlying skill is absolutely there. But that infrastructure debt, the grease, and the incomprehensible language, it just completely ruins the customer experience. So, staring down this massive wall of infrastructure debt, the architect realizes they can't just slap new marketing labels on old habits.
Exactly. You have to fundamentally rebuild the ground floor of how you operate. You basically have to force an identity shift from operating as a reckless mercenary to operating as a disciplined architect. And the sources show that this whole process begins with the first two pillars of their new maturity model, which are IT and intelligence.
Right. So if the problem is grease on the steering wheel, you can't even begin to clean it up if you don't know where your tools are.
You need a cleaner garage.
Exactly. You need a cleaner garage. So the architect looks at Pillar 1, which is T1IT, standing for IT Operations and Autonomics. And they mandate a complete shift away from shadow IT and this manual, patched-together home lab mentality.
Yeah, they are moving to a declarative single source of truth,
Right.
or SSoT. And this is a really profound realization in the logs. They realize that documentation is the infrastructure.
Documentation is the infrastructure.
Yes,
Right.
the architect realizes that if your network isn't mapped to global governance standards, like IEC 27001 or NIST SP 853, it's just a hobby.
Okay, let me stop you right there, because we just threw out some serious alphabet soup.
Fair enough. Yeah.
For anyone who is outside of, like, a compliance department, what do ISO 27401 and NIST actually do? Are they just fancy checklists to make auditors happy?
Well, they often feel like checklists to the people filling them out, but fundamentally they are rigorous mathematical proofs for your network security.
Proofs, like in geometry.
Kind of, yeah. NIST, for example, it provides this standardized framework to identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover from threats. If you don't use a standard like that, you might have, a brilliant firewall, but you have absolutely no idea if you've actually protected the CEO's laptop or the HR database.
Oh, I see.
You can't mathematically protect an asset if you don't have a standardized way to prove it actually exists on your network in the first place.
Okay, that makes total sense. And the ultimate goal of that first pillar is to create autonomic self-healing systems. So if a server goes down, the system just detects it and spins up a replacement automatically, driving the mean time to recovery to, well, near zero.
Yes, exactly. And once that digital house is clean and structurally sound, they move up to the cognitive layer. How does the system actually think? And that's pillar 2, T2INT, which covers intelligence and pedigree.
Right, the intelligence layer.
Yeah. In the old T1.1 days, the architect used to rely on writing these dense philosophical academic essays to track threat actors. They actually called it the Papyrian refutation method.
Which sounds incredibly impressive if you're in a university philosophy class, but it sounds like an absolute nightmare for a busy security analyst who just needs to know if they are currently being hacked.
It's a massive bottleneck.
Yeah.
Corporate executives and SOC managers, Security Operations Center managers, they hate threat intel that produces 40-page philosophical PDFs.
I bet.
They want actionable firewall rules. So the T1.2 upgrade completely strips those academic essays out. It replaces them with machine-readable pipelines using the diamond model of intrusion analysis and SDIX taxacy feeds.
Okay, another quick pause for definitions here. What exactly is the SDIX taxacy feed doing? Is it just like a list of bad IP addresses?
Oh, it's much more dynamic than that.
Oh.
SDIX is a standardized language for describing cyber threat information, and taxacy is the actual transport mechanism that routes that information around.
Okay.
So imagine a global neighborhood watch that communicates instantly in a language that your security cameras and your locks can natively understand.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so instead of human reading a PDF about, say, a new Russian malware strain, figuring out the indicators and then manually typing those into a firewall, a SDIX taxpay feed allows one computer to instantly tell your firewall, hey, block this specific behavior right now.
And the logs call the ultimate goal of this anticipatory orchestration. You filter the noise so your Tier 1 analysts aren't just drowning in false positives all day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because staring at 10,000 false alarms a day causes massive alert fatigue. The analysts burn out, and they end up missing the real threats.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If we are automating everything, like we have self-healing IT infrastructure, we have machine-to-machine threat feeds that automatically update firewalls without a human ever reading a report, Is the ultimate goal of this framework to completely remove the human analyst from the loop? I mean, are they just building a machine that doesn't need people at all?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the goal is actually the exact opposite.
Really?
Yeah, the goal is the preservation of human energy. The sources actually provide a strict mathematical baseline for system efficiency to prove this.
More math, okay.
Yep. The equation is E equals R sub A divided by C plus F. So efficiency equals resource allocation divided by cognitive load plus operational friction.
Hold on, you're giving me an algebraic equation for system efficiency. Isn't this just overcomplicating basic automation? I mean, why does the architect need to mathematically quantify this? It kind of feels like we are slipping right back into that infrastructure debt we talked about.
It's a great pushback, but the math is actually really necessary here because it forces a shift in how you value your engineers. Normally, businesses measure efficiency by, how many tickets an analyst closes in a day.
Right, purely volume-based.
Exactly. But this equation flips that. By using the single source of truth and those automated SDIX feeds, the system drastically reduces cognitive load, which is the C in the denominator, and operational friction, the F.
Okay, so the machine is handling the repetitive stuff.
Yes, the machine handles the repetitive high-friction data routing. And why? To protect the human's metabolic energy, you want pure, unexhausted cognitive bandwidth reserved for high-level strategic decision-making. What the military calls the ODA Loop Observe Orient Decide Act. You don't want your brightest minds doing manual administration. You want them hunting the adversaries that the machines actually miss.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the digital foundation is locked, the noise is filtered out, and the human energy is protected. But cyber threats don't always stay neatly contained inside a server rack, right?
Unfortunately, no.
Sometimes they bleed over into the real physical world. And that brings us to the next evolution of this architecture, which requires a completely different mindset.
Yes, navigating physical reality. This is Pillar 3, T3 CCIP, which stands for Critical Infrastructure and Operational Technology, or OT. This is where the framework explicitly addresses kinetic liability.
Kinetic liability, meaning like things actually moving, breaking, or stopping in the real world. A dam opening, a power grid shutting off.
Exactly. The architect realizes that you cannot treat fragile OT systems, like a municipal water plant, a manufacturing assembly line, or a city's transit system like a standard IT web server.
Because they're totally different beasts.
Completely different. If you run a standard active vulnerability scan, like an Nmap sweep, on a 20-year-old programmable logic control, you won't just get an error message on a screen. You could literally crash the physical machinery.
Wait, really? Why does a digital scam cause a physical machine to just crash?
It's all because of how these legacy systems were built. An Nmap sweep basically sends a barrage of unexpected, kind of malformed data packets to a device just to see how it reacts. It's poking the device to find vulnerabilities.
Okay.
A modern IT server has plenty of memory. It just drops the weird packets and moves on. But a 20-year-old programmable logic controller, or PLC, running a physical water valve, it has almost no processing power. It was built in an era before cyber threats even existed.
Oh, wow.
So when it gets those weird packets, its tiny CPU just maxes out trying to read them, it freezes, and suddenly that physical water valve gets stuck open.
Wow. Which is terrifying. So the stakes shift completely here. In traditional IT, the priority is almost always data confidentiality. Keep the secret safe. But in this physical OT space, the sources say the priority shifts to SRP, right? Safety, reliability, and productivity.
Exactly. And to enforce that physical safety, the new blueprint mandates the Purdue Enterprise Reference Architecture, or PERA.
Another framework. So what does the Purdue model actually do to stop that water valve from crashing?
It strictly segments the IT network from the OT network. You have to build a barrier, basically an IT-OT DMZ. The rule is that data can flow up from the physical machine so you can monitor them, but commands cannot easily flow down.
Okay, so it's a one-way street, basically.
Essentially, yeah. And crucially, it mandates passive network anomaly detection. You listen to the network traffic, sort of like a doctor with a stethoscope, without ever injecting a single active packet that could disrupt a mechanical process.
That makes perfect sense. You just can't poke the fragile machines.
Exactly.
But, to test all of these physical and digital defenses we've built, you actually need an offense. You have to simulate the bad guys to see if your defenses actually work. And that's Pillar 4, T4, Attack, Adversary Emulation. But here again, the logs show the architect running face first into the infrastructure debt of their old system. The legacy tech sounded like, well, a reckless mercenary out for blood. Autonomic sabotage.
Right, which, as we established earlier, makes a CISO's blood run completely cold. You do not want the word sabotage anywhere near a fragile water valve.
Definitely not.
So the transition mathematically purges the sabotage lexicon. It replaces it with disciplined, continuous controls validation. It maps every single offensive move perfectly to the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain and the MITRE ATT&CK frameworks.
Let me make sure I'm visualizing this correctly. So the shift here isn't just about changing the name on a document. It's basically the difference between a joyrider stealing a car to see how fast it goes and breaking things just for fun versus a highly trained crash test engineer systematically driving a car into a wall at exactly 40 miles per hour just to calibrate the airbags.
That is a brilliant analogy. What's fascinating here is that the ultimate goal of the red team, the offensive side playing the adversary, in this new framework, their goal isn't to win. It's not about owning the network or bypassing the firewall just to boost their own ego and prove they can do it.
Right. The goal isn't the crash. The goal is the airbag data.
Exactly. The goal is to safely generate high-fidelity telemetry. You replicate specific threat actor behaviors precisely mapped to that INRE ATT&CK framework, which is basically just a global encyclopedia of known hacker tactics. You run the tactic, and you see if the blue team's automated defenses actually catch it. And if they don't, the red team's findings automatically feed back into the system to improve the blue team's rules.
Yeah.
It's this beautiful, closed, collaborative loop.
Okay, we have to pause here because this is an incredibly robust system we've built over these 4 pillars. We have a declarative single source of truth for IT. We have automated anticipatory threat intelligence that's protecting human energy. We have physically safe, segmented critical infrastructure. And we have disciplined crash test style adversary emulation, safely testing all of it.
It really is a masterpiece of cyber-physical intelligence architecture.
It is, but, and this is a big, but none of that matters if you can't get the CEO to actually sign the check to pay for it. If the board of directors doesn't understand the value of that closed loop, it functionally doesn't exist. And that brings us to the final connective pillar of the entire model.
Pillar 5. T5's GROD, Wisdom and Narrative Alchemy. This is the engine that translates technical reality into business reality.
The griot. I mean, traditionally in West African culture, a griot is a storyteller, right? A keeper of history and lineage. And the sources call this pillar the connective tissue of the entire architecture.
Yeah, they do.
It's an automated system, I think they call it the signal refutation engine, that extracts all the raw logs, the friction, the technical wins from the first 4 pillars, and it translates them into what they call sovereign capital.
Right. And sovereign capital essentially means executive-level artifacts. It's marketing 5.0 deliverables. It's taking a highly technical firewall configuration that, say, blocked a Russian IP address and translating it into a board-ready risk dashboard that shows exactly how much money was saved by preventing downtime.
Right.
And the architect introduces the ultimate mathematical formula that governs this entire transformation. It's the value proposition score.
I just love that this architect literally created a math equation for marketing themselves. It's incredibly rigorous. The formula is V sub P equals I times M divided by F sub C. So your value proposition equals the impact of your work, multiplied by its market relevance, all divided by consumption friction.
Okay, so what does this all mean in reality? Because if I'm a deeply technical engineer listening to this, I might be rolling my eyes a little bit. Is marketing 5.0 and this whole V sub P formula just corporate PR speak for dumbing it down? Are we just making the tech look pretty with pie charts for the executives who don't actually understand the code?
This raises an important question, and the sources are actually very aggressive in refuting that idea. It is the exact opposite of dumbing it down. It is a strict engineering approach to human communication.
Okay, how so?
Well, remember the formula. You divide by consumption friction. Let's walk through it. Say your team intercepts a massive malware strain. The impact, the I, is huge.
Right. The market relevance, the M, is high because it targets your specific industry. But if you walk into the boardroom and hand the CEO a 50-page log file of dropped network packets, the consumption friction, that F sub C denominator, is incredibly high.
Because they can't read it.
Exactly. They don't know what a packet is.
Yeah.
Because that denominator is so massive, your overall value score drops to near zero.
I get it. It doesn't matter that you saved the company $10 million because they literally cannot consume the data that proves it. Your actual impact gets buried under the friction.
Exactly. By mathematically stripping out the internal jargon, the infrastructure debt, and all the irrelevant technical toil, you lower that F sub c denominator to a fraction of a whole. And when you divide by a fraction, the true massive impact of the technical work mathematically multiplies.
That is brilliant.
You aren't changing the impact. You are simply removing the noise, blocking the signal. Handing them a one-page dashboard that says threat neutralized 0% downtime is almost zero friction.
Yeah.
It proves to the decision makers that you understand their risk, not just your code.
So it's fundamentally about respect. You know, respecting the time, the background, and the cognitive load of the person you are communicating with. If you lower their friction, your value skyrockets.
Precisely. It's how the architect fundamentally proves their identity shift.
Mm-hmm.
They are no longer this isolated technician hoarding knowledge in a basement. They are a true enterprise architect driving real business value.
Wow. Okay, let's take a breath and look at the massive journey we just unpacked today.
It's been a long one.
It has. We started with the diary of an architect who was bogged down in their own mythology, and we watched them systematically evolve a highly complex system. We saw it move from a chaotic, jargon-heavy sovereign gauntlet into a sleek, five-pillar cyber-physical intelligence architecture.
We saw the foundation shift from reactive, messy home labs to mathematically proven autonomic IT infrastructure.
Right.
We saw threat intelligence move from dense academic theory into automated, anticipatory pipelines that actively protect human cognitive energy.
We witnessed the vital pivot in the physical realm, moving from risky digital scanning that could literally crash a water plant to consequence-driven engineering that safely protects fragile infrastructure. We saw how reckless hacking was sanitized into disciplined, continuous crash test-style controls validation.
And finally, we saw how the griot pillar acts as the connective tissue, using the mathematics of narrative alchemy to translate all of that raw technical brilliance into measurable, undeniable executive value.
And that brings us right back to you, the listener, because whether you are coding back-end infrastructure or managing a remote sales team or designing a physical product, you really have to ask yourself a hard question. Are you hoarding your own sovereign capital behind a wall of specialized jargon?
Yeah.
Are you forcing the people who desperately need your expertise to learn a mythological language just to understand your value?
It's the tragedy of the unaligned asset. If they can't understand it, they just can't value it.
Exactly. Think about that brilliant inventor's perfect self-healing system we talked about at the very beginning. The architecture was flawless, but because of the name on the blueprint, it was totally rejected. So, think about the value proposition formula we walked through today. Value equals impact times market relevance, divided by consumption friction. If your personal infrastructure debt is keeping your true value hidden from your boss, your clients, or the market, what is the single piece of consumption friction you can mathematically eliminate from your communication today to reveal your actual impact to the world?